Pacific Ocean, June 1944. At dawn, the horizon is a seamless gray, the kind of silence that comes before history shatters. Beneath it moves the might of the U.S. Navy. 15 carriers, their decks lined with sleek blue Hellcats gleaming in the pale light. The air smells of oil, salt, and tension. Men in flight suits wait beside their machines, helmets in hand, eyes fixed on the endless sea. The Marianas lay ahead, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, the stepping stones to Japan itself. For the first time in the Pacific War, American forces were striking directly at the enemy's inner ring. The Japanese Imperial Navy, desperate to halt the advance, had thrown everything it had left into this fight. 9 carriers, over 400 planes, and the promise of vengeance. To the Japanese command, it was to be their decisive battle, the turning point to save the empire. To the Americans, it was just another day on the line. On paper, the balance looked even. The Japanese still had numbers and the vaunted A6M0, light, agile, deadly in the right hands. But those hands were no longer the same. Many of Japan's best pilots had died in the Solomons and the Marshalls. Their replacements, barely trained, would now face men with hundreds of hours of combat experience, guided by radar and discipline. It was a duel of philosophies, honor versus precision, instinct versus doctrine. In the ready room of the USS Essex, Commander David McCampbell, calm and quiet beneath the fluorescent hum, studied a map of the Philippine Sea. He was not the kind of man who spoke to inspire. He believed in brevity, orders clear, voice steady, no room for doubt. Around him, the younger pilots of Fighter Squadron 15 leaned in, listening. They knew the odds. They also knew what kind of leader he was. Someone asked, half joking, "What if they outnumber us again, Skipper?" McCampbell didn't look up. "Then we make every round count." By mid-June, the fleets were converging. U.S. radar screens began to pulse with contacts, hundreds of Japanese aircraft, closing fast from the west. A wave unlike anything since Midway. The American fleet braced for impact. At 10,000 feet, the first Hellcats rolled into formation. Their engines, the throaty Pratt & Whitney R2800s, beat a rhythm that echoed across the ocean. Above the roar came the clipped voices of air controllers calling out vectors and altitudes. The carriers' combat information centers, new nerve centers of naval warfare, guided each squadron with mathematical precision. For the Japanese, this was a different kind of sky. Their Zero pilots had no radar, no coordination, only visual spotting and the hope of surprise. But surprise had already been stolen. From his cockpit, McCampbell saw the first glints of sunlight reflecting off distant wings, enemy formations, climbing slowly toward his group. 10 Hellcats, 43 Zeros. The ratio was absurd, suicidal even. But McCampbell understood energy fighting. The Hellcat was not built to dance. It was built to strike. He gave a simple command. "Hold altitude. Make them come up." The younger pilots hesitated. Every instinct screamed to dive first, to strike fast. But McCampbell's order was absolute. Let them climb. Let them burn speed. Let physics fight for you. The Zeros rose in perfect formation, their silver wings catching the sun. For a heartbeat, it was beautiful. Thousands of feet of empty blue between predator and prey. Then McCampbell rolled inverted and dove. The first burst shredded the lead Zero. It caught fire instantly, spinning down like a falling comet. The formation below exploded into chaos. Radio chatter filled the air. "I've got 2 on me! Brake left! Brake left! Splash 1! McCampbell's calm voice cut through it all. "Stay high, work in pairs." It was not a dogfight, it was geometry in motion. Down below, sailors on the carrier decks looked up to the distant white streaks carving the sky. They couldn't see details, only patterns, arcs and spirals, bright flashes against the blue. To them it looked like an enormous, slow-moving storm, a ballet of death unfolding miles above. In the next 15 minutes, the sky would belong to 10 men. But for now, the ocean was still quiet, waiting. In war, McCampbell would later write, you don't get to choose the odds. You only choose what you do with them. The impossible ambush had begun. The Pacific noon burned white, the horizon swallowed by haze. 10 F6F Hellcats sliced through that glare, thick-winged, blue-gray, heavy with ammunition. Below them, like a swarm of glinting insects, 43 Zeros climbed in tight formation. "Let them come up. Patience!" McCampbell's voice crackled over the radio, calm, measured. To his men, it wasn't just an order, it was faith in physics. Each second the Japanese pilots climbed, their engines bled energy, their turns grew slower, their options fewer. They were reaching for a fight they could never quite grasp. From the USS Essex, radar operators tracked the developing pattern in stunned silence. One small cluster of American signals encircled by dozens of enemy blips. On paper, it looked like suicide. But McCampbell was turning numbers into bait. At 8,000 feet, the Zeros finally leveled off, noses high, throttles wide open. Their lead pilot, veteran or perhaps just brave, pushed forward to engage. The moment his formation spread, McCampbell spoke again. Now. The 10 Hellcats rolled over in perfect unison. From above, they came down like falling knives. The sun blinded the Japanese pilots. By the time they saw the contrails, the first Hellcat had already opened fire. 50 caliber tracers streaked downward, punching holes clean through metal and flesh. A Zero disintegrated mid-turn. Another exploded in a blossom of smoke. Boom and zoom. It wasn't artful flying, it was efficient killing. Inside McCampbell's cockpit, the control stick bucked hard as he dove. He squeezed the trigger once, short, disciplined bursts, and pulled up before overshooting. His wingman followed perfectly, firing where the commander's rounds had left the Zero smoking. Below, the ocean shimmered with falling wreckage. Everywhere, Japanese formation dissolved into fragments, singles, pairs, all frantically weaving, trying to climb, to roll, to survive. McCampbell called out targets with the precision of a surgeon. "Pair at 2 o'clock, break high. Watch your 6, you've got one climbing under you. Good hit, move, move." In the chaos, the Americans never lost composure. Their training, the endless drills, the classroom tactics, the months of repetition, was now instinct. In contrast, the Japanese pilots were fighting ghosts. Their radios crackled with static. Formation discipline shattered. The Zeros that dove were outrun. The ones that climbed were cut apart. A Japanese ensign later recalled, "The sky was full of gunfire. They appeared from nowhere, from the sun itself. It was not a fight. It was a harvest." McCampbell's wingman, Lieutenant Ensor, scored his third kill in under 5 minutes. He looked down and saw nothing but smoke spirals, black stains against the blue. "Commander, I'm out of ammo," he said. "Then stay high," McCampbell replied. "They'll come back around." But they didn't. From the Essex, spotters watching through binoculars couldn't believe what they saw. Dozens of small white plumes, parachutes and flames, marked the sky where the enemy had been. 10 Hellcats still circled above, untouched. In the control room, a voice murmured, "They're cutting them to pieces." By the 10th minute, the radio channels fell almost silent. The noise of battle faded, replaced by the rhythmic thrum of engines coasting on half-empty fuel tanks. A final Zero broke formation, diving for the clouds. McCampbell banked, rolled, and followed. His tracers walked up the Japanese tail until fire engulfed the cockpit. The aircraft pitched down, vanishing into the sea. "It's Splash One," he said quietly. The words hung in the air, stripped of excitement. 10 Hellcats, 43 Zeros, 15 minutes. They reformed over the smoking horizon, wings shining with powder burns and bullet scars. No one cheered, no one spoke. It wasn't victory, it was disbelief. "We'd been trained to fight for our lives," McCampbell later wrote. But that day, it felt like they'd never stood a chance. Above the Philippine Sea, the trap had closed. The radios were quiet now. Only the deep, vibrating hum of the engines filled the cockpits. The sea below glistened like a mirror, dotted with the dark stains of oil and wreckage. The fight wasn't over, but the balance had already shifted. McCampbell looked left and right, all 10 Hellcats still with him. Their wings were scorched and dented, their ammo belts nearly empty. He switched frequencies, called the Essex. "Control, this is Alpha Group. 43 confirmed, returning to base." A pause, then static. The radar officer's voice came back disbelieving. "Say again, 43? "Affirmative. 43, no losses." The Essex's Combat Information Center went silent. Men turned from their screens. One officer muttered, "That's impossible." But out there, above the Philippine Sea, The impossible had just happened. The surviving Japanese formation was retreating west, broken, scattered, desperate. Many pilots had ditched in the open ocean, their fuel gone, their planes riddled with holes. The Americans didn't chase. They didn't need to. The battle had turned from combat into history. Hours later, McCampbell and his men banked toward the Essex, the sun dipping low behind them. On deck, the crew waited, staring at the empty sky until the faint silhouettes appeared. 10 Hellcats, their propellers flashing in the orange light. When the first wheels touched down, the flight deck erupted, not in cheers, but in stunned applause. Mechanics, ordnancemen, and deck officers just stared. The planes were scarred, riddled with shrapnel holes. One still smoked faintly from the engine cowling. McCampbell climbed down, his flight suit soaked with sweat. He removed his helmet, and for a moment said nothing. A deckhand asked, almost whispering, "Sir, how many?" 43, he replied. All of them. The man didn't answer. He simply stared, as if hearing numbers from another world. That night, the pilots gathered in the wardroom. The room buzzed with restrained energy, the kind of quiet triumph that felt more like relief. McCampbell barely touched his coffee. "They flew well," he said softly. "They just didn't stand a chance." Around him, the younger men nodded, subdued. They had all seen the same thing. Zeros burning, pilots parachuting into the endless sea. It wasn't glory. It was slaughter. The Marianas Turkey Shoot, the newspapers would call it. But for those who had been there, it wasn't a hunt. It was the death of an air force. In the following days, reports came flooding in. Across the Philippine Sea, other squadrons had achieved similar results. Over 300 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. Entire carrier air groups wiped out. The Imperial Navy would never recover. The Americans, once outnumbered and outgunned, now owned the Pacific sky. It wasn't luck, it was preparation. Radar, discipline, teamwork, and the machine that made it possible. The F6F Hellcat, the rugged blue workhorse of naval aviation. McCampbell's name spread through the fleet. The man who turned the impossible into geometry. But he deflected every mention of heroism. "We flew by the book," he said. "They came to us. We just did our jobs." Still, something in his tone carried the weight of understanding. He knew what had changed that day. The age of the dogfight, the spinning, dueling ballet of individual skill, was over. From now on, air combat would belong to those who mastered altitude, speed, and communication. Late that night, McCampbell walked the deck alone. The horizon glowed faintly under a rising moon. Beneath it stretched the calm Pacific, wide, silver, and endless. He thought of the Japanese pilots, of their courage and futility. And he thought of the men beside him, their trust, their training, the precision that had made 10 Hellcats into a force of nature. He turned toward the sea and whispered, "We didn't win by chance. We won because we learned." 15 minutes, 43 kills. But the true victory was invisible. The triumph of discipline over chaos, of reason over instinct. The storm was over. The Pacific sky was quiet again. By dawn, the ocean was calm again. An endless glassy sheet of blue. The wreckage of yesterday's battle had already begun to sink beneath the waves. Oil slicks drifted silently where hundreds of planes had fallen, their smoke trails gone, their pilots vanished. For the men aboard the USS Essex, it was a morning after the storm. The decks were still, the air heavy with exhaust and salt. Mechanics moved among the Hellcats with reverent care, patching bullet holes, counting the scars that proved survival. Commander David McCampbell stood at the edge of the deck, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes on the horizon. The sound of gulls mingled with the distant hum of engines idling. There was no celebration, only the sober knowledge that something irreversible had happened in the skies above the Marianas. The after-action reports would confirm what radar logs and eyewitnesses had already made clear. 10 Hellcats had destroyed 43 enemy aircraft in 15 minutes. Across the fleet, over 300 Japanese planes were gone, carrier groups annihilated, veteran squadrons erased. The Imperial Navy's air arm was finished. The battle was over, but what it left behind was not victory. It was silence. In ready rooms and mess halls, the talk was subdued. The pilots of VF-15, once eager for another sortie, now sat quietly, their jokes fading halfway through. One young pilot muttered, "It was like they never saw us coming." Another replied, They didn't. It wasn't arrogance. It was realization. The war in the air had changed forever. The Japanese had entered the battle believing in spirit and maneuver, in the old romantic vision of one-on-one combat. The Americans had brought science, altitude control, radar interception, radio discipline, and the methodical calm that turned war into arithmetic. It was the moment the Pacific Air War became a contest of systems, not souls. McCampbell wrote in his log that night, "We met them high, struck once, and left. That was all it took. War shouldn't ever feel easy, but that day, it almost did." His words weren't prideful. They were haunted. Because for every pilot who returned, there was a quiet understanding. On another day, in another sky, it could have gone differently. They had seen the price of unpreparedness in the enemy's fall. They knew the lesson would one day apply to them too. When the Essex reached Pearl Harbor weeks later, news of the turkey shoot had already spread across the Pacific. Newspapers back home called McCampbell a hero. They printed bold headlines. One commander's ambush destroys 43 Zeros. But when a reporter asked him how it felt to be America's top Navy ace, he just said, "It wasn't one man, it was the machine, the training, and the men who flew by the book." His humility matched the generation he came from, warriors who never mistook survival for glory. By 1945, the skies over Japan would tell the rest of the story. The once mighty carrier wings of the Imperial Navy would never rise again. The Hellcat, that rugged blue steel angel of the Pacific, had done its job too well. In one of the final interviews before his death, McCampbell reflected quietly, "We weren't gods up there. We were men doing something that worked because others had failed before us. That's all war ever is, learning faster than the other side." The film ends as it began, with a quiet sky. Archival footage fades in. Hellcats taxiing down the deck, sunlight bouncing off metal, propellers shimmering. A voice, steady and low, carries the final words. In 15 minutes above the Philippine Sea, one commander and 10 men rewrote the laws of air combat. They proved that courage is not noise, and mastery is not luck. In the silence that followed, the world entered a new age of warfare, an age where the calmest mind, not the fastest hand, would rule the sky. The sound fades. The screen turns to black. Only the hum of engines remains. Then nothing.